This conference will now be recorded.
So we're going to look at a PowerPoint tonight. So there'll be quite a bit of talking from me during the training. We've also got a few exercises that we can do. Not quite sure how they're going to work yet, but we will give it a go and muddle through. Hopefully it will be okay. So as you know, because of you're here, we're going to be talking about particularly residential risk assessments, and as well we're going to be talking about the REN forms. Now, I'm not an expert in REN forms at all, apart from I do them the same as we all do them, but Lynn Palmer, who is our coordinator for all these things, has given me some things that she'd like me to say to you, so I'll be doing that in a little while. What I am really good at is risk assessments. So this is why I was asked to do this training. I do quite a lot of risk assessments in my job, so I'm a bit pernickety about them, really. So yeah, you'll find that out a little bit later. So this is what we are going to be doing tonight. So first of all, we're going to look at why we do risk assessments, what's the point to them, and we're going to link that into safeguarding, girl guiding policy and procedure. We're going to be having a look at the format of the risk assessment and what the content should have in it. Then we're going to look at a residential risk assessment, because of doing a residential risk assessment is slightly different to normal ones that you might do for your unit meetings, because there are things that we have to consider in addition to just what we're doing. And then, yeah, as I said, we're going to talk a bit about REN forms and completing REN forms. Okay, so first of all, the first question is, what is the point of risk assessment and why should you care about it? So this is why. It is part of our responsibilities in terms of providing a safe space for girls and young women that we do a risk assessment for all of our activities. For those of you who've done their safe space training, you'll be aware of this because it's a big part of the safe space training. It's also part of the policy and procedure of girl guiding that we complete risk assessments for residential events and activities, and it's also part of the code of conduct, which we all adhere to, obviously. And finally, the impact on ourselves, I think, is something that's quite important. So worst case scenario, if something did happen on one of our events, would we be able to say that we'd done everything we could to protect the girls in the event of something going wrong? And by doing the risk assessment, we can reassure ourselves that we're doing everything we can. And ultimately, in the very, very worst case scenario, we could be part of an investigation into a serious accident or even a death. So we need to be able to say that we have properly completed our role in making sure that the event is as safe as we could possibly make it. So we're going to go and have a look at actually what goes into a risk assessment. So I hope that you've all seen one of these before. I've taken the boxy part of the risk assessment, so we're going to look at each of the columns and what we should be putting in them. And this is the bit that we're most interested in. However, I will make a point that risk is dynamic and not static. So you could have filled in these boxes with everything you could possibly think of at the time when you're filling in the risk assessment. But sometimes things happen that we don't expect or that we haven't thought about. Now, we don't have crystal balls, and risk assessment is dynamic, isn't it? So don't be afraid of changing things from what you have written in these boxes when you're sat in your nice warm home having your cup of tea on a Thursday night. Okay. We talk about risk assessment a lot, but actually we're not doing a risk assessment, we're doing a risk management plan. It's very easy to say this is a risk, but actually what the important bit is what we're going to do to stop that risk that we've identified from happening, or at least mitigate it from happening. So we're going to go and have a look at the first column. The first column is the hazards column, and this is the one that I think people probably struggle with the most. In fact, most leaders are fine to identify what caused a hazard, but actually it's more than just putting the thing. So in this lovely picture, the toaster isn't the hazard in itself. For it to become a hazard, something has to be done with it, such as putting a fork in it. Another one that people often write on risk assessments is strangers. But people you don't know are not necessarily a hazard. It's people with nefarious intent who are a hazard. Now, you may be thinking she's being really pedantic here to be saying to describe exactly what the hazard is. But it does make risk assessment much more effective because if you can really think through actually what might happen and how am I going to stop that from happening. So, for example, scissors. Scissors themselves aren't a risk, they're not a hazard. However, running with scissors is a hazard. Not knowing how to cut with scissors properly is a hazard. Using scissors as a weapon is a hazard. And so for each of these things, you can think, right, what am I going to do to stop the kids running around with scissors? What am I going to do to make sure that they know how to cut things properly? What am I going to do to stop them from stabbing each other? So all of those things you can put into your risk assessment from identifying exactly what is the hazard. Has anybody got any questions on that at all? Maybe if you say something in the, because I can't see your faces now, so if you say something in the chat thing, if you have any questions, and then Michelle can come to you. It's very quiet.
Yeah, there's nothing on chat, but I think people are engaged because I can see their faces and people are listening, hanging on your every word. Don't worry.
Fabulous, fabulous. Okay, next section then is who or what is at risk of being affected and how. Now, when we write risk assessments, very often, in fact always, the people we're thinking about is our girls, isn't it? But actually, whatever we do, it always involves more than just the girls. So you may want to consider, in terms of who is affected, the guiding volunteers and members, us, the adults, we count as well, parents and carers who might be coming and helping, or might be just knocking around, visitors external to guiding, for whatever reason, and also members of the public. You know, if we're doing something when we're out and about, you know, running around in a park, we might want to consider if we might cause any risk to people who are around. And in terms of the how, we don't have a crystal ball. So I don't know if a child who trips over a guy rope is going to break their arm or sprain their ankle. But what I can say is that probably they're going to hurt themselves in some way. So I would put in my risk assessment physical harm, because that covers all those eventualities. And you could maybe put minor physical harm, serious physical harm, depending on what you're writing. Emotional harm is something that we also need to consider, particularly if something really serious happens, and not just in response to the particular child or adult who might have been harmed, but what about everybody else who was there? What about the girls who witnessed it? What about the adults who had to deal with the aftermath, or might have to deal with the aftermath? So it's worth thinking about, actually, how will this affect everybody else who's there? There's a reputational damage to girl guiding you might want to consider. Loss, financial loss, and damage to objects, of course. So this, what are we already doing to manage the risk? It's fairly straightforward, really, isn't it? What are we already doing or going to do at the event to minimise the risk? So this is your list of, tell the children not to run around with scissors. Use ropes that are brightly coloured, and all these kind of things that you would do anyway, or you would think to do. This is what you put in that box. So it's fairly straightforward. And the next bit of class is the likelihood of the risk occurring. Now, Girl Guiding have quite usefully given us a very nice table to help us decide how likely the risk is to happen. The table you can find on the bottom of the risk assessment. So if you just go right to the end, there it is. So there we go. It's unlikely, something that might rarely happen, down to very likely, nearly always happens, like kids falling over. There's always one who falls over, isn't there? So something like that would be very likely. Unlikely, drowning doesn't happen very often. So we can use our common sense and our experience to decide which box that might fall into. And the next bit is the severity of the risk. And again, we can look at our very handy box. So we're going to look, we have slight harm, so superficial, harmful, minor things, fractures, minor, or ill health. And then there's the extremely harmful, so that's the top end of the scale. So by cross-referencing the likelihood and the severity of the risk, then that will give you a risk level. If I can go back one, yay. So if you've got something that is extremely harmful and very likely to happen, that's going to be high risk. Maybe you might want to rethink whether you do that activity. Most of what we do fits into low or medium risk anyway. So that's fairly straightforward, isn't it? Are any further controls necessary is quite a difficult box to fill in, I think, because you've probably put everything that you wanted to do to stop the incident from happening in the first box that you filled in. So some ideas of things that you could put in the further controls necessary box are things like what might change to make that activity unsafe. If might it suddenly start raining in the middle of an activity and everybody might slip on wet grass, all those kind of things. Or if maybe one of your adults gets taken ill, so you haven't got ratios, those kind of things. And I also try and put in that box things that you would do if it does happen, because we spend a lot of time thinking about, all right, how are we going to stop it happening? But actually, what if it does happen? Who's going to do what? Who's going to ring the ambulance? Who's going to give first aid? Who's going to take care of all the other children? So these are things that you can use that box for. And then, lastly, we've got action by. which it sounds quite straightforward, who's going to do it and when. But some things to think about is actually, do all the adults know what's in the risk assessment and have they contributed to it? It is good practice, and also makes it a lot easier if you do a risk assessment with all of the adults who are on the trip, because of everybody thinks about things from different perspectives, and people will think about things that you haven't thought of. So it might be tempting to just bang out the risk assessment because of you've got to get it done, because you've got to get your REN in on time. But if you do it with the rest of your leadership team, it will be a much better risk assessment, and it will have everybody involved, and everybody will know what's on it, which will make it more effective in terms of its use. And also, the girls kind of need to know what's in it as well. So particularly if you're going on a residential with older girls like rangers, there might be things that you want them to know, and maybe parents might want a copy of the risk assessment. It's often really good to get the girls involved in writing the risk assessment. I know my guides really enjoy risk assessments. Virtually everything ends in death, but they have great fun thinking about what could go wrong and what are we going to do to stop it from going wrong. So that would be really good. And also, you're going to send off your REN to your commissioner or maybe your mentor. So how are you going to show them that everybody does know what's in the risk assessment? So those are things to think about from that box. Okay. Has anybody got any questions at this point?
There's nothing on the chat, Sarah.
No.
Either you're blinding them with so much information that it's all going in nice and easy, or they're being a bit shy. Not sure what it is.
Okay.
But definitely nothing on the chat.
Right. Please, if you do have a question, please do ask it.
I mean, you are explaining it really well, so it's.
Thank you. Okay, shall we move on then to how to write a residential risk assessment? Because of, as I said earlier, there are things that you might want to consider on a residential risk assessment that you wouldn't necessarily think about when you're writing a normal activity risk assessment. So here are some things. So shall we start? Let's start with accommodation. So you might be staying in a hotel or in a hostel. So those things are going to have to be considered. There are specific instructions from Girl Guiding in terms of hotels and hostels for rainbows, in particular, in terms of them being self-contained. So that's worth considering if you're going to do that. Sleeping arrangements. Where is everybody going to sleep? Where are the over 18s going to sleep? Where are the young leaders going to sleep? How many kids are you going to have in each sleeping place? All these kind of things you're going to consider, particularly men and boys. If you have either of those creatures on your trip, you're going to need to think about where they're going to sleep, where they're going to go to the toilet, that kind of thing. Transports. People often forget this bit, but we're responsible for the girls from when they get on our coach or when we get on our train. So how are you going to get to the event and from the event? And during the event, are you going to be going on any buses, trains, whatever, to for example, to get to the activities that you're doing? So all these things are going to be part of your risk assessment in terms of making sure that you're keeping the girls safe. Alcohol is something that is particularly, it's on the Girl Guiding website when you go into running a trip. says particular guidance about alcohol. It says all adults must remain capable of dealing with an emergency or first aid incident, and at least 2 adults should be below the legal alcohol limit for driving a vehicle. So that's something you might need to talk about with your leadership team. On trips, we often do activities that are run by others. We need to confirm the qualifications held by instructors are Girl Guiding compliant, and and how do we know this? How does your commissioner know that you've done that when you send in your REN off? Very often activity providers will be able to send you a risk assessment for their activity, which is really handy, saves us a job. But we need to think about that in terms of our girls. So how are we going to apply that to our guide who is in a wheelchair, or our guide who is on the autistic spectrum? So all those things we need to consider, and we need to be able to show that we've done that when we send that off as part of our REN application. At night. So what about girls who get up to go to the loo, or who are feeling sick in the night? How do they know what they should be doing? Do the lights need to be left on? Security, fire evacuation, how does that all happen? Who will be responsible for turning off and checking appliances? Food, allergies, intolerances. Is the cooking of the food included in the risk assessment, particularly if maybe you're on a rainbows sleepover and the rainbows aren't involved in the cooking, but you've got adults who are doing the cooking? Then we need to be risk assessing them as well, and not forgetting that we need to look after them. I think that's all of them on the list. Okay, so lots to think about. Right, we're going to try and do an activity now to see if we can have a look at a risk assessment and decide, is this all right? Oh, we've got a question. We've got a question, Michelle. How important is it to tailor your risk assessments to your actual girls and leaders, rather than just using a generic risk assessment that someone else has produced previously? Absolutely, very, very important, Lisa, because otherwise what's the point in doing it? We are looking after our girls, not the person's girls who has written the original risk assessment. So we need to do it for our girls, and this is why Girl Guiding don't provide template risk assessments, because of they don't know who we have, or what circumstances we have, or what our girls are like, or what disabilities or allergies or special needs they have. So this is why we do each one not quite from scratch, because we've done them, things can roll over, but they're all considered from scratch. Does that answer your question, Lisa?
Can I just add a point that that substantiates that, actually, in that we had an incident a couple of years ago where people were eating on camp. The girls were eating on camp in the folding chairs, and one girl put her metal plate on her lap and actually had really serious burns on her legs. And the first thing, obviously, when you've dealt with the incident, is to go and have a look at the risk assessment, and there was nothing in there about it. And so actually it should be that you're actively managing that risk as well.
Thank you.
Lisa's just said, so unis shouldn't just be sending Glenbrook's risk assessments with their RENs.
No, even though it's very good. Yes, but there needs to. You can send Glenbrook's risk assessment with your REN, but you might want to add to it for the things that about your girls that isn't in Glenbrook's risk assessment. Right, so hopefully I'm going to show you. So here's a risk assessment that I came across quite recently for a brownie sleepover. So what I'd like you to do is take a couple of minutes to have a look through and have a think about, does this actually cover what it needs to cover? Do you think it is acceptable? And if not, why not? The event does involve the brownies doing some activities. So when you've had a chance to have a read through, I'll scroll down a little bit. I'll scroll down. Right, I'm going to scroll down now, I hope.
Do you want people
bottom
to comment in chat if they've got some comments to make?
I think, yeah, maybe. I think it'd be good to have some voices on this bit. So if anyone's got anything to say, could they wave at you and you could put them on.
They can take themselves off mute. They should be able to take themselves off mute.
Hi, I've got a quick question then. Should we try and make it more specific so it's not just all participants? Obviously, the risk and accommodation might be different for the leaders versus the children.
Yes, it could be, couldn't it? In that, yeah,
I wasn't planning on being on the top of any bunk bed to fall out.
Yes, yeah, it's quite a bit lazy, isn't it? Just to put all participants, and I think sometimes it does apply to all participants. But if you just put all participants for everything, then you're not being hugely inclusive, or differentiating between what risk is for who for what.
It so just seems to be a bit generic versus what you were saying.
Yes. Yep. Okay. Any other comments?
It doesn't actually say what could happen. It's identifying the hazards, but it's not going into the risks of what those hazards could lead to.
Yes, absolutely. So, for example, car park. Well, what does that mean? What might happen in the car park? How might it happen in the car park? So you need to be much more specific than that.
There's nothing dynamic suggested within this. This is just a fixed shot of time. There's nothing about, if the weather changes, do the risks in the car park change. It's not specific about craft activities. You need to know what each of the craft activities are, and then split those down into their hazards, risks, and how they're minimised. I'm going to shut up now.
No, please. You're making some really good points. Like use of scissors, etc. Or like what? What's etc. mean exactly?
Yeah, I've noticed that. They've done it with a lot of the who or what is at risk. They've minimised it. They've not gone into detail of who is at risk or why they're at risk and what the risk is.
Yes.
Also,
absolutely.
it looks like they're going to discuss everything when they get there, rather than maybe having discussion with the girls before they leave.
Yes, yeah, and you would want to have a chat with the girls in advance, because you need to set expectations, don't you, for the girls? in terms of what what behaviour you want from them, and you'd want to get them involved in the risk assessment, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
Go on.
sorry, it's okay, keep going. I've just got another point.
Go.
The one that's the walking around the village, they're discussing that on arrival. Well, I hope that's during the morning of the arrival, but they're going on the walk. By the time the walk happens, they'll have forgotten what was discussed on the morning when they arrived.
Yes, absolutely.
And actually, it also needs to include about, silly behaviour during the walk and who's going to take responsibility for dealing with that at the time, rather than this all just being a preparedness before. All leaders are going to have responsibility for stopping such behaviour.
Yes, yeah. And the leader in charge has given herself lots of stuff to do, hasn't she?
She has. I also think it's a really boring way to start a pack holiday, I'm afraid to say. I appreciate you've got to do a safety briefing, but blimey, they're going to be there for about 4 hours listening to all of this. Not exactly an exciting way to start. But I think one of the big things for me was because there's no severity and likelihood included in here, I can't see straight away where are my pinch points for my residual risk that I need to focus my attentions on. I'm just kind of trying to look at everything all the time, and that's just not practical.
Nope. And this is why it really helps to do it on the official form, because of then when you do answer all the questions that our Girl Guiding would like us to answer, which is really helpful, isn't it? And it's also good, so if anything does happen, then we can say we have considered everything, and look, here's our official form with our official risk assessment on it.
What I'm trying to get people to do is, with the official form, is to use a separate form for each aspect of their event. So have a separate form that would be all about the kitchen and food and preparation and storage and all that sort of thing, because otherwise you get people who try and fit everything for an entire event in what is probably 15 rows.
Yes.
And actually, I could probably do 15 rows just from a cook's perspective.
Yes, yeah. And my top tip for those 15 rows is, if you use the Word document, then your boxes get bigger as you're typing. If you use the PDF document, your boxes stay the same size. So if you print it off, everything you've written that's beyond the size of that box doesn't get printed off. So always use the Word one. That's my top tip, because I did that. I was annoyed when I had to retype it out again. Okie dokie. Right. Are we ready to move on? Let's get my PowerPoint back. Right. We're going to have a little go at writing a risk assessment, or at least writing one in our heads anyway. Might not actually write it. So I've got a plan here for a rainbow sleepover. It's not the most exciting of plans, I must say. I've only just thought about it 20 minutes ago, but hopefully it'll give us some things to talk about. What would you put on your risk assessment for this event?
Be how the girls are arriving, if they're getting dropped off at the car park or they're getting meeting somewhere and walking in.
Yes. Yeah. And at what point are you taking responsibility for the girls? in terms of, you know, if they're being dropped off, and are you making sure that parents are walking them into the event rather than just leaving them in the car park?
Oh, good and safe.
Can I just say that I'm currently sat outside our meeting place just in case anybody turned up having not received the email and not received our Facebook notifications tonight.
Have you had any turn up yet?
No, I've just accosted a family, but there weren't any guides in the car.
Maybe you get a reputation for that.
I'm wondering how long I have to sit here. We start at 7:30. I'm thinking I'm safe to go home and continue this training in comfort.
Although it sounds like a great recruitment tool, Lisa, to just hijack families as they're walking past.
No, I don't think that family want to join because there's this crazy woman who just came to tell them guides isn't on tonight. And then I looked at the kids in the car.
I would imagine that it's safe to go back and do the rest of the call in your living room. Yes.
That's what I will do.
Okay, so what would we need to put in the risk assessment for when girls arrive, and what are we actually going to do?
Depends what type of event it is. I guess it's about the handing in of forms as well. Like if you got help forms and that, who's taking responsibility for that? So it's not just and who's going to be around to speak to parents should they need to talk to you or hand over medication, those sorts of things as well. It's not just about how the girls are going to be handed over to you, it's all the paperwork and that comes with it.
Yeah,
and it's such a short window as well, because it's 4 o'clock they're arriving and 4:15 they're running around, doing games. Have they got time to put their own things to one side? Have they got a specific area for that? It's all about just time management. If you've got girls that are running late, aren't coming for 20 past, they're going to miss 5 minutes of activity.
Yeah, you won't get all the rainbows in and sorted in 15 minutes, not setting up beds, definitely not.
Yeah,
you won't even get the guys doing that, never mind rainbows.
Fabulous. Okie dokie. So you've got them all in, and then at some point, probably not after 15 minutes, you're going to be doing some games.
You need to cover any trips or pushing or falling that might happen.
Is it inside or outside?
Yeah.
You will need to know about any hazards in the space that they were going to play in. Obviously, our hall has tables and chairs and things that need to be assessed for risk if the girls are going to be running around.
And what equipment's going to be used as well.
Yeah. All the points. Next bit then, having tea and washing up with rainbows.
What are they actually eating? Is it just
I was going to say with rainbows, we don't have them wash up. We do it ourselves because otherwise it's just water everywhere. So I would have considered that.
So this might be where you might consider allergies, maybe.
If it's hot or cold, tea.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're having sandwiches or soup, depending on what, and obviously then it's the allergy part. Where they're eating, are they eating on the floor, are they eating at a table?
Who's doing the preparation of the food they would need to be?
Yep. Okay. Easter cards, which
Scissors. No running with scissors. Glue. No eating the glue.
Oh, yeah.
You joke, but I had that happen yesterday.
Oh wow!
with the bead in their hair?
Small pieces. Are they going to inhale any small beads or pom-poms or
put them in their ears?
Or in someone else's ear?
Yeah.
Okay, that's sounding quite dangerous to me now.
Any orifice.
Okay.
I mean, I'm nervous if nobody else is, by the way, now.
Okay. So providing they've all survived making Easter cards, we're going to give them some hot chocolate and do some kind of sitting down, talking games. So what do we need to consider there?
And how hot is your hot chocolate?
Can one of you say that again?
I said, half of them don't like hot chocolate, so you've got to find something else for them to drink anyway.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, and maybe this. Yes. Yeah, how hot it is. Do you have any?
Spillages.
Yeah. What are you going to do with spillages? How are you going to clean it up? Do you have any rainbows who might wet the bed, so might not have hot chocolate just before they go to bed? All that kind of stuff. And I guess now might be the time when the rainbows might get homesick. So how are you going to deal with that? You know, what are you going to do to deal with homesickness?
See, we've been lucky. We've never had homesickness when we've done them.
Right. Yeah. But again, do you do something in particular to stop them getting homesick in the first place?
Keep them busy.
I had one girl really homesick once, and in the end I had to sit next to her while she went to sleep, but the door was open and there was another leader there.
Yeah.
So safeguarding myself as well.
So this is something that you might want to consider in your risk assessment, is if you have to do something like that and you have to have another leader who's with you, have you got enough other leaders to look after the rest of the kids and get them into bed or deal with them getting up, all that kind of stuff. Okay. I was quite optimistic saying bed and sleep at 8 o'clock. I realised that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, that's going to be bed. It's going to be bed, sleep, and mess around.
Yep.
Bed, mess around, and sleep. Yeah. It's about midnight when they'll go to sleep.
Yeah, probably.
Mm-hmm.
And then up at 5.
Yeah. Wanting to get breakfast and get started.
Yep, definitely.
Go on.
No, you carry on.
I was just going to say, when on our last pack holiday, on the second night, we were watching a film, and I had 2 girls fall asleep whilst watching the film, and we made the decision not to move them and get them back in bunk beds, and instead we had 2 leaders come and sleep upstairs in case they woke up in the night and worried about where they were. But what I had forgotten was the 2 kids that it were bedwetters. So although we were trying to do a nice thing and trying to protect ourselves, it caused a bigger issue because they woke up in the night and then they were wet, and then we were dealing with that. But I guess that's something to think about, is if they do fall asleep somewhere that isn't planned.
Yes, yeah, that was a lesson learned, wasn't it, Rachel?
Massively.
But that's also then something to remember about what we've had brownies wearing pull-ups still, and actually how you deal with them, because they quite often have been quite shy about it, and another thing to think about as well.
Yeah.
Well, see, our rainbows paraded them.
Oh.
They were not bothered in the slightest, throwing around the room.
Yeah, it's just when we had like a couple of 9-year-olds still, obviously bedwetters, and sent with pull-ups, and what do I do with this? And then you've got the others that are like, what do I do with it in the morning when it's soaking wet? And you're like, thanks.
And spare sleeping bag as well, making sure there is spares.
Yeah,
definitely.
Learnt the hard way there as well.
We had a girl guide who decided to throw up every time she went to sleep. So we now have a running joke that people, she got homesick that badly, the supper that we gave her, and it was really, really small supper, I know sometimes it's crackers, set was like 2 times in a row she threw up because she was homesick. So it come to a time where we were actually waiting and waiting and waiting for her to wake up before we could all go to bed. But that was our guide.
Yeah, she was fine during the day, but as soon as she got to evening, do you know, it was everybody's winding down and she played on her mind more. She'd work herself that up. Yeah, so we just, one of the older guides actually took her under their wing and supported her. That.
Yeah, and often you don't necessarily hear about these things in advance from the parents, do you? So this is where you have to think on your feet, isn't it? And your risk assessment gets really dynamic. Yeah.
Especially when the parents don't know if there's any issues because they're not being told. Because the girl was an only child, so she'd done no overnight school trips. She'd done no overnight trips before. She'd only slept at grandparents. So they didn't know any of this either. So it was a learning curve for both us and the parents.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of our rainbows, it's their first time away from sleeping anywhere other than at home.
Yes. Is there anything else? Sorry, mate. What are you saying?
We all can't sing them their own favourite bedtime song. We're gonna have to think of something that collectively can do together. Maybe ending songs like taps or something.
Okay. Is there anything else that you need to think of in terms of overnight? What might happen overnight that needs to go into your assessment? Yeah, nightmares. Anything else?
Waking up and not knowing where they are.
Yes, yeah, sleepwalkers, not knowing where they are.
Yep. I was going to say lights as well.
Sorry.
I was just going to say lights. Do some of them need lights on or leaving lights on so they know how to get to the bathroom, things like that?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And then we've got things like, what if there's a fire in the night? Who's going to wake up? Who's going to get the girls from which room? All those kind of things. Who's going to be responsible for taking the list of, if you've got a list of girls, who's going to be responsible for taking and ticking it off? Who's going to call the fire brigade? All these kind of things. Who's going to lock the doors? Who's going to make sure all the windows are shut? All the plug sockets are switched off? All these kind of things. And then at 5-ish, they're going to wake up and get ready and have breakfast. So I guess that's going to be quite similar to what we'd already said about washing up. And then we're going to go to the park and have an Easter egg hunt. So what might we need to think about there?
Area that you're in.
The park. So how they get into the park.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. So yeah.
What's the area like? Is there any dog mess on the floor? If it's a park, or is it open to the public? And how many ways on or off this patch of grass that you've got?
Yeah.
Things like rainbow's going to needles, glass, fins.
Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, quite a few things to think about there, isn't there? So in kind of going through the plan and thinking about each thing individually, in terms of actually what are we doing, what might go wrong, what are we going to do to stop it from going wrong. By walking through it from start to finish, it does help us to really think through what we're going to put on our risk assessment. So that's helped you to think about a way of doing it, which is really useful. So you could think about, I'm going to think about cooking now, I'm going to think about activities now, I'm going to think about this now. But if you walk through it as you're doing it, then you make sure that you do cover everything, because of you're going through it, aren't you? And you're less likely to miss stuff. Okay. Right. Thank you for that. For your contributions, particularly all the funny ones. It makes me pleased I don't do rainbows. It really does. Right, I'm going to try and start the PowerPoint.
Sarah, there were a couple of things on the chat that I just think it's
Right.
useful to pick up, if that's okay.
Yes, please
so
do.
Rachel commented that schools have things for teachers and everyone on the trip to sign to say they have read the risk assessments. Would we suggest this is best practice? Which I think is a great idea, because of course all of the leadership team should read the risk assessments and be involved in creating them.
Yep.
Lisa also commented that we need to consider the manual handling of their bags that they're bringing their kit in, the risk of having overexcited rainbows, children with specific additional needs that impact on activities, hand washing, misuse of activity equipment. All great suggestions.
They are, yeah. I appear to have messed up the screen now.
Okay. Can I do anything to help?
Yeah, can you do entertainment for a few minutes?
Yeah. Do you want me to take your presentation off so that nobody can see that you're messing about with your screen?
It's a bit late now. I found right. We're here.
You found
We're
it?
here.
You're all right? Okay, brilliant.
Okay. Right, this is the last bit. So this is a reminder about the REN forms, or the Residential Event Notification Form. So what I need to tell you about these is it has a lot of guidance on the form. There's a lot of writing on there. Read it. I know it's obvious, but really read it, because it tells you exactly what you need to do. So you know what information you need to provide when you're filling in the boxes, which is really helpful to your commissioner, so that she doesn't have to keep coming back to you for more information. And also, it does tell you that the risk assessment needs to go with the part 1, along with the outline plan of the event. So that will help you, by reading it, it will help you to not forget those things. There's also guidance available on the Girl Guiding Derbyshire website. If you go to the website, go to resources and then the Commissioner resource file, and it's called, surprisingly, REN Guidance Notes for Leaders. In particular, it does contain guidance for what you to do if you need a going away with qualification mentor. So that would be worth reading, particularly if you need a mentor, if you want to do your going away with licence. Make sure your venue has been approved. There is a master list of venues that have been approved, and your commissioner does have a copy of these. It's not on the website because obviously we don't want to be telling people where we're going to be doing sleepovers. But your commissioner does have an up-to-date copy. And you need to leave enough time for it to be approved. So a visit would need to take place. And that needs to be organised. Someone needs to go and do it. Someone needs to fill out the form. So you need to allow enough time for that. And the big one in the middle, timescales, is there is a reason that there are the timescales for getting your REN forms in. And I know it's a long time in advance, but it is really helpful for the commissioners to give them time to go through it, go through your risk assessment, check on that everybody's got the qualifications they need, all these things. It does take time to do, and it's quite a big job. So you are really helping your commissioners and yourselves if you do stick to timescales. Okay. And last of all, there is some very helpful stuff on the Girl Guiding website about risk assessments that you can utilise for further study, so you can do fantastic risk assessments in the future. Yeah, One is the risk assessment guidance. It is quite thorough, and there's an example risk assessment as part of that, although I don't think it's that good in comparison to ones that we've done today. Being prepared is a document which is all about how to write a risk assessment. And then there's the guidance on events and going away, which is really handy to read because it does change from time to time. Some of us have been around for quite a while, so it might be worth refreshing every now and again to make sure that we are using the most up-to-date guidance. And that is it. You've got to the end. Well, hey. Does anybody have any questions?
There's a couple of questions on the chat. Do you know the timescales on putting in the REN form as part of the going away with scheme license?
No.
Would you like me
Do you know, Michelle?
I think that Izzy will know. Izzy, can you take yourself off mute and answer that question?
Yeah, I've unmuted myself in preparation. Basically, the timescales when you put in a REN form as part of your going away with licence, it does need to stick to the 12-week deadline for part 1 and the 4-week deadline for part 2. In addition to that, you do need to register on the scheme. It is helpful if you register on the scheme perhaps a few weeks in advance of that, so that you can meet with your mentor. She can help you to put together the risk assessments and the activity plan prior to sending that in. But the 12-week deadline is the limit unless it's a special case. Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
And a message that I think probably everybody will appreciate is, can they have a copy of the presentation, please? Now that's going to be quite tricky because we haven't got your email addresses. So I think if you do want a copy of the presentation, you can email me, which is, I'm just writing it in the chat. My email address is this. cc@girlguidingderbyshire.org, nice and simple. So I can ask Sarah to send it to me and I'll send it out, so it saves her the problem of having to do that. I've also in the chat put a link to a really literally 5 or 6 question survey monkey just to get some feedback on the process. But I think it might be useful if we can just go round the room, so to speak, and just ask if you've got any questions about the training while we've got Sarah here, because she's done an amazing job, and I know it's been probably incredibly weird doing it in this format. So it's a good opportunity. It's a good opportunity to just ask any questions that you might have been nervous about putting in the chat, but please ask. So I'll say your name, and then when I say your name, if you can take yourself off mute, if that's okay, and we'll manage it in that way. So Emma T, can I come to you first?
Sorry, yeah, no, I don't think I've got any questions at all, actually. I've found it really useful. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brilliant. If you can put yourself back on mute when we finish, that's great. Thank you. Then who's next on my list? Jenny?
No. No, I found it really good. Very interesting. No questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Next, we'll come to Kate Summers.
I think all my questions have been answered. I'm looking to do my going away with scheme, so this has been a good first step. But I think, unfortunately, I may have a bit of time on my hands now to get some risk assessments done.
Yeah, indeed. Fab, thank you. Helen?
No questions for me. Again, it's just been really good and actually just a brilliant use of time. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tanya? Tanya, are you there?
Sorry, it had for some reason it had gone dark and I'd heard nothing. Yeah, I found it really helpful. It has been incredible, looking at it in a different way, making me self-aware of what needs to go in and how much detail to put in. It's been really good.
Thank you. May?
Hi. I'm real technophobe. I hate things like this. I just like to say that on the phone, you don't get an opportunity to chat in the chat box because I'm doing it off my mobile. So putting questions in answer, I would have put loads in, but the only one I want to ask is one for peak. What risk assessments do I have to do for peak? And obviously, is peak must be doing one for the activities, but then do I have to do one for the activities for the girls to do the activities? Or is that a whole new ball game?
So I think it's a really good question, because it might be a question that other people are wanting to ask and haven't got round to. So in terms of the activities that are being led by the peak team, they will risk assess those. Everything else you will need to risk assess yourself. So your transportation to camp, the setting up of equipment, their being on camp, the girls getting to and from the activities, you need to risk assess as well. But while they're actually doing the activity, that should be covered by the risk assessments for the led by the activity teams. Do you have anything to add to that, Izzy? Or Sarah, of course. Sorry.
Yeah, I have, in that if you have any girls who have any additional needs, you might want to do an additional activity risk assessment for those particular additional needs for that particular girl.
Yeah,
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I don't think I've got anything to add to that. So no, you just need to, I suppose, just think about the event in your head, May, and think what your girls are going to need and what sort of like situations that they could encounter, and then include that all in your risk assessment. So think about your event from the start to the finish and how that's going to fit in around the peak activities.
And do I hand them into my district commissioner for her to have a look at, or do I give it to the person who's trying to be assessed? Because I'm doing my section 8, so I've already asked to be mentored for that. Do I give it to I haven't got my mentor for that yet.
I think,
but it's only just in the initial processes.
I think May, that Lynn Palmer's going to be your mentor for you going away with license, but I think she'll confirm that with you soon. What you could do is you could show them to your mentor first, and she can give you some advice over whether she thinks it includes all the necessary stuff, and then you'll submit them with your REN form to the district commissioner.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's fine, thank you.
Thank you. Can I come to, I'm just trying to see who, Lisa, can I come to you, please?
I knew you'd come to me when I'd just got a mouthful of cheese and biscuits.
Oh, okay. Did you risk assess that?
Is there any mileage in us putting together a bare minimum list of hazards and risks that need to be covered in risk assessments for different types of events? So like one for camp, one for brownie holiday, one for rainbow overnight, one for day trip, one for peak. What I'm thinking, the reason that has jumped to mind is I know when our area commissioner did your training the other week, she was quite surprised at the level of detail. So for instance, that girl, I can't remember the name of the word I want, duties, that we needed to risk assess duties, which, you know, for me, it's just a natural thing, having gone through a day, what the girls have to do, that yes, it would include those that are wooding, the risks for them, those that are water, the risks for that activity and so on. but not everybody thinks in the same way.
And I guess not every commissioner is going to know what those things entail, are they?
No. And not every unit leader is going to think of all of the potential things during the day, because we just do them. You know, when you've been doing this for years, your duties just is a natural part of the day. Whereas your activity that you go and do, that is something that straight away people think, yeah, I need to do the risk assessment to go with that. I'm just thinking it might be a useful checklist as a starting point, but with a really big rider on it that says this is not exclusive.
I think it's worth thinking about doing it. I don't think it would hurt to have something, but we need to try and make sure that doesn't just become a tick list.
Yeah, exactly. And so it would be they would need a rider that says plus anything else happening in your event.
Yeah,
I think I don't think it's a bad idea, but I share Sarah's concerns, and I think you have those concerns as well, Lisa, because we all know that the best risk assessments are when you sit down with that form that's blank, and you say, right, you start the trip, where do we start? And then you walk through the whole thing thinking about all the risks that you could encounter both as a leader and as a girl. As you go on that trip or whatever, and I suppose it's good to have we thought about that list, but it couldn't be anything more than that, could it?
Yeah, no, it would be a have you remembered, and it's the things that people could forget, or that might have come up.
Not a bad shout.
Now that we're rolling this out across the county, it's the things that come up that people haven't previously thought about, because clearly there is a need to encourage people to think about those things.
Yeah. And maybe it's a dynamic list that people add to as they as they recognize things that they cover that other people don't, or whatever. So that could be it could create quite an interesting list, I guess. What do you think, Sarah?
It could do, couldn't it? Yes. Yeah, it's worth having a go at it, I think.
Brilliant.
And now we've got
Thank
time
you.
on our hands.
Say again, Sarah.
And now we've got all this time on our hands.
Yeah. Okay, can I come to Sarah and Elle, please?
I've not got any questions. I've actually found it really interesting to just remind me what I need to put in my risk assessments.
Brilliant. Fab, thank you. And Rachel, can I come to you?
Hello. Yeah, that was really, really useful. I think my question was a little bit similar to Lisa's, but I missed the beginning of what her said, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating it. I know that when I did my going away with scheme a couple of years ago, I found it really difficult actually to do the risk assessment, because although I've seen them before, like through school and things, I've never actually done one. And I did ask for some help and advice with it and wasn't really given a great deal back. But then someone else did say to me about going on Girl Guide in Anglia, I think it was, and they had some examples of different risk assessments for different activities. And I found that a lot more useful. So I guess that kind of ties into what Lisa was saying about having a sort of checklist thing. And I know I've got better doing my risk assessments as the last couple of years have gone on, as I'm thinking a little bit more about things. Because like you say, you do a lot of it without realising, you minimise that risk as you're going along anyway. But I think as a starting point, particularly for new leaders, who may never have done one before, it is useful to have that little bit more guidance maybe.
Yeah, I'm just talking about having the hazards and risks listed, and then they fill out the rest of the rows, a crossways for how they're managing it. and what the likelihood and severity and whatever is, to direct people's thinking.
Yeah, definitely, and that's what I think I could have done with a bit of help with that first time. So I know I was really quite overwhelmed by it. Like I say, having never completed one before and being new to doing that sort of thing. I wasn't new to guiding, but new to that. I'd just taken the unit over and things. So you know, that guidance is useful.
And I wonder if actually our best way of making this work is to be doing something like a short vlog on our newly launched Girl Guiding Derbyshire YouTube channel. There's my shameless plug, which, you know, is sort of Sarah doing a piece to camera. Sorry, Sarah, but a piece to camera that's saying, you know, thinking about risk assessments. Have you thought about this, and this? Come back to me in 10 minutes. Have you thought about this, and this? Because the danger, I've seen those Girl Guiding Anglia risk assessments, and I've seen them quite a lot when they've come in for as part of a REN that's been submitted for a Derbyshire trip, because people do literally
just
take them wholesale. And the problem with that, as Sarah's said, you know, several times during this session, is you're not then really understanding and managing the risk. You're just writing it down.
You're becoming complacent.
Yeah, but I absolutely take on board your point. When you're a new leader, because I remember it myself very clearly, and suddenly you're presented with having to do a risk assessment and you are a bit set adrift. So we need to do something about that to support you doing it.
Thank you.
Kate, can I come to you, please? Kate? Have I already come to Kate? Where's Kate gone?
No, I think you've already been me, unless there's two.
Oh, there is two. So I've been to Catherine Summers. I'm coming to Catherine Shaw now. Sorry, I've got you down as a Kate.
Hi.
Hi.
My only bit of a bugbear really is when you do your REN form, when it has to be 3 months in advance. I don't have numbers and I don't have a clue what activities we're doing. So I've not really been able to put a risk assessment together at that point. The only one I've been able to do is about the camping and the very general things, the cooking, things like that. And I found that it's much better for me to do my risk assessment for the 4-week REN form for the second part. So is that okay? Because I don't know what activities we're doing till I've got numbers.
I think at the planning stage and at that REN Part 1 stage, you are basically doing an outline plan and an outline risk assessment. So and it doesn't matter about the numbers, because that can change, and you can change everything about the REN when you do the Part 2. But it's just to give an idea of, you know, what you're doing and how you're thinking about the risks and what you're doing about them. So it's a draft basically. So do what you can and then build on it. And you can always, you know, you don't have to wait until the 4 weeks before to submit everything all together. You could, you know, once you've booked your archery, for example, you can do your archery risk assessment and then send that to your commissioner at that point, rather than just doing it all at, you know, week 4 and having loads of stuff to look at. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, so it's okay to just do a very basic risk assessment at that 12-week stage then?
Yeah, because you're assessing what you know that you're doing, and you can't assess what you don't know what you're doing yet.
And I would add to that, actually, that if you've submitted a risk assessment 12 weeks in advance of you going, I'd have expected it to be reviewed and adjusted within that 12 weeks in the run up to the trip anyway. And equally, I'd also add, having been on the receiving end of an email with 25 separate risk assessments when it gets to Part 2 of the REN, it's much better if you send them in piecemeal rather than in one go, because that's a really depressing email to get.
Yeah, that's fine.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you. And Charlotte, can I come to you?
Hello, well, I'm a newly qualified leader and I've just taken over my first unit. So this has been really helpful for me to understand what is involved and what level I need to go to include everything that I need to.
Well, congratulations, Charlotte. Welcome to the team.
Thank you.
I hope you're enjoying it so far.
Yeah, definitely. It's taken a little bit of getting used to, but it's really enjoyable. Yeah, the girls are really having fun, and so am I.
Brilliant. That's the plan. Whereabouts? What section are you doing, and whereabouts are you, if you don't mind me asking?
Rainbows in First Overseal in Swaddling Coat.
Brilliant. Yeah, in South East. Fantastic. Good. How exciting! So it was good that we did good that Sarah did a rainbow event then.
Yeah, definitely. I think it'd be really useful for new leaders if something along this lines was included as part of the leadership qualification, the detail that is needed to be included.
Yeah, great observation. Thank you. Okay, I've seen that Emma Green has said no questions. Thank you, Emma, for participating, unless you've got something else to add. No? Okay. Izzy, anything from you?
Only one point that's to add about the 12-week part 1 REN. It's quite easy to think that we all know what we can and can't do on events, but it's actually quite good if you submit your activity plan. There might be something in there that a commissioner or somebody that's visited that place before realises immediately that's either not an appropriate activity, or that there's a better way of doing it, or somewhere better that you could use. So I think that's a reason why it's quite important to submit an activity plan with as much detail as you can on, even if you haven't got the risk assessments to go with it at the time.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Thank you. Okay, so I think we've been around the room. Please fill in the survey, because I'm really interested to know how you found the experience. Sarah, is there anything you want to say before I just close down the session?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you very much, everybody, for participating and asking really good questions and making really good observations. It does make my life a lot easier if people answer questions when I ask them. So thank you very much, and thank you for some good feedback.
Brilliant. And on behalf of everybody that's taken part, and behalf of the county team, Sarah, thank you a huge amount for being our guinea pig and running this pilot training. I really appreciate all of you for giving up an hour and a half of your time on a Tuesday night, and I hope you found it useful. Please fill in the evaluation form, and if you send an email to my email address, I'll make sure that you get the presentation. But huge thanks to Sarah, and huge thanks to all of you, and I wish you a very good evening. Thank you very much, everybody.
Michelle, you might lose the chat when you end the webinar, so people might want to take the link now.
Okay.
Don't know if it definitely will, but I know ones I've done in the past have done that. So
yeah, please take it now. I'll leave it open. Thanks, Emma. That's top tip. I'll leave it open.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. When you've got the SurveyMonkey link, please feel free to dial off, and then when everybody's left the room, I'll close it.
Bye, Michelle.
Bye.
I can't see